He had always trusted reality. It felt solid beneath his feet, steady and predictable. A table was a table. A wall was a wall. The world followed rules. That was what science had taught him. But on this quiet night, something began to crack. He sat alone in his small apartment, the city lights glowing outside his window. Rain tapped softly against the glass. His laptop screen was the only light in the room. On the screen were words that refused to leave his mind. Quantum entanglement. Two particles, created together, connected in a way that no distance could break. If one particle changed, the other changed instantly, even if they were separated by miles or galaxies. He leaned back slowly. Scientists had tested it many times. The results were clear. The math worked. The experiments were solid. Even Albert Einstein had struggled with it. He called it spooky action at a distance. Spooky. That word echoed in his mind, because this was not just strange. It was disturbing. How could something here affect something there with no signal traveling between them? Nothing could move faster than light. That was one of the main rules of physics, and yet entanglement seemed to ignore that rule. He stood up and walked toward the window. Cars moved slowly below, headlights stretching across wet streets. People were inside those cars, living their separate lives, thinking separate thoughts. At least, that was what everyone believed. Separate bodies, separate minds, separate realities. But what if separation was not as real as it seemed? He imagined two tiny particles floating far apart in space, still, somehow aware of each other. If matter itself could remain deeply connected, what did that say about everything else? A strange feeling rose in his chest, because if the universe was connected at its deepest level, then maybe reality was not made of isolated pieces. Maybe it was made of relationships. He returned to his desk and continued reading. In the quantum world, particles did not behave like solid objects. They behaved like waves of possibility. They existed in many possible states at once. Only when measured did they choose one outcome. Only when observed. He froze. Observed. The act of observation changed the result. In the famous Stubbs experiment, particles acted like waves when no one was watching. But when scientists tried to measure which path they took, the particles behaved differently, as if they knew. Of course, they did not know in a human way, but the result was clear. Observation mattered. Reality responded to measurement. He swallowed slowly. If observing particles changed their behavior, what did awareness change? The rain outside grew heavier. The room felt smaller. He tried to calm himself. This was just physics, just equations, just experiments. But something deeper was moving inside him. For years, he had believed consciousness was only a product of the brain, a side effect of neurons firing. But now, he wondered, if reality at its core responds to observation, could consciousness be more than a byproduct? Could it be part of the process? He turned off the lights. The room fell into darkness. He stood there quietly, listening to the rain. He looked at his own hands, barely visible in the dim light from the street, solid, real, physical. But deep inside those hands were atoms. Inside those atoms were particles, and those particles followed rules that did not match everyday reality. Rules where connection ignored distance. Rules where observation shaped outcomes. He felt both small and strangely powerful. Small, because the universe was far more mysterious than he had imagined. Powerful, because if observation mattered, then awareness was not meaningless. He lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in his life, reality did not feel fixed. It felt open, responsive, almost alive. And as sleep slowly approached, one question remained burning in his mind. If the smallest pieces of the universe are connected beyond space, then how deeply connected is everything else? The next morning, he woke up feeling different. The world looked the same. The sun rose. Cars moved. People rushed to work. But something inside him had shifted. He arrived at the lab earlier than usual. The building was quiet. The long hallway lights flickered softly above him. He unlocked his office door and sat down, staring at the whiteboard covered in equations. Today, he was not just reading for curiosity. He was searching for answers. He opened his notes and began reviewing one of the most famous experiments in physics, the double-slit experiment. It sounded simple. Scientists fired tiny particles at a wall with two small openings. Behind the wall was a screen that recorded where the particles landed. If particles were solid objects, they should pass through one slit or the other, like tiny bullets. But that was not what happened. When no one observed which slit the particle passed through, the particles created a wave pattern on the screen as if each particle had gone through both slits at the same time. Both paths at once. He paused. That alone was strange enough, but the experiment became even stranger. When scientists placed detectors to observe which slit the particle went through, the wave pattern disappeared. The particles behaved like solid objects again. The mere act of measurement changed the outcome. Observation did not just record reality, it influenced it. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. How could a particle decide how to behave based on whether it was being observed? Of course, particles do not think. They do not have minds. But the pattern was clear. Reality at the smallest level seemed to remain open, full of possibilities until measured. Only then did it become fixed. He felt a quiet tension rising in his chest. In everyday life, reality feels solid and definite. A cup is either on the table or it is not. A light is either on or off. But at the quantum level, reality exists as probabilities, possibilities, and something about observation turns possibility into fact. He walked to the lab window and looked outside. Students crossed the campus lawn, laughing, unaware of the strange truth hidden beneath their feet. Everything around him, buildings, trees, people, was made of particles, and those particles followed quantum rules, which meant the solid world was built on something far less solid than it appeared. He remembered reading about experiments that confirmed entanglement across large distances. When two particles were entangled, measuring one instantly determined the state of the other. No signal traveled between them. No time delay. Just instant correlation. It was as if the particles were not truly separate objects at all, as if they were parts of one deeper system. He felt the same chill he had felt the night before. If the universe at its core is not made of separate pieces, if observation plays a role in shaping outcomes, then reality may not be a finished structure. It may be a process, an unfolding event, and humans are not outside that event. They are inside it. He returned to his desk and whispered something he never thought he would say. What if consciousness matters more than we think? The question felt dangerous, because if it was true, it would change everything. Not in a magical way, not in a fantasy way, but in a fundamental way. It would mean that awareness is not just watching the universe, it is participating in it. And for the first time, he began to suspect that reality was not simply happening in front of him. It might also be responding to him. For days, he could not shake the question. Observation changes outcomes. Entangled particles stay connected beyond space. Reality at its core exists as possibility until measured. These were not spiritual ideas. They were scientific results, carefully tested, repeated, verified. And yet, something about them pointed beyond simple mechanics. He sat in the university library, surrounded by thick textbooks and old research papers. Sunlight streamed softly through tall windows. The room was quiet, almost sacred. He began reading about the deeper interpretations of quantum mechanics. Not the equations, he already understood those. He wanted to know what it meant. One name kept appearing, John von Neumann. Von Neumann had suggested something bold. He argued that the chain of measurement from particle to detector to brain could not continue forever. At some point, something non-physical seemed to enter the process. Consciousness. Later, another respected physicist, Eugene Wigner, also considered the possibility that awareness plays a role in collapsing the wave function. These were not careless thinkers. They were brilliant minds. They were not claiming magic. They were pointing to a gap in understanding. The young researcher felt both excited and uncomfortable. Modern science often treats consciousness as a side effect of brain activity. Neurons fire, chemicals move, awareness appears. But quantum theory seemed to leave a strange opening. If reality remains uncertain until observed, what exactly counts as observation? Is it a measuring device? Is it information? Or is it awareness itself? He closed his eyes and imagined a simple scenario. A particle exists in many possible states. A detector records one result. But who reads the detector? A scientist. And what happens when the scientist becomes aware of the result? Some interpretations suggested that the final collapse might be linked to conscious experience. He felt a wave of doubt. Many physicists reject this idea. They argue that consciousness is not required, that physical interaction alone is enough. But still, the question refused to disappear. Why does the universe behave in a way that seems incomplete without observation? Why does possibility turn into reality only when measured? He thought about entanglement again. Two particles, separated by great distance, acting as one system. Maybe the universe is not made of separate pieces at all. Maybe it is a single, connected whole. And maybe consciousness is not outside that whole. Maybe it is woven into it. The idea was not mystical. It was subtle. If the brain is made of quantum particles, and those particles follow quantum rules, then perhaps awareness is not isolated inside the skull. Perhaps it is part of a larger field of interaction, like a wave in an ocean that does not realize it is the ocean. He opened his eyes and looked around the library. Every book, every table, every person, all built from atoms, all atoms built from quantum particles, particles that exist as probabilities, particles that can become entangled, particles that respond to measurement. He felt something shift again inside him. Maybe consciousness is not an accident in the universe. Maybe it is a natural expression of the same deep reality that allows entanglement. He did not claim to have the final answer. But the wall between physics and philosophy no longer felt solid, it felt thin. And through that thin space, a new possibility was beginning to appear. What if mind and matter are not separate things? What if they are two sides of the same deeper mystery? The idea would not leave him alone. For weeks, he walked through the world as if seeing it for the first time. Trees were no longer just trees. Buildings were no longer just structures of steel and glass. People were no longer separate figures passing by. Everything seemed connected by something invisible. He sat in a quiet park one afternoon, watching the wind move through the leaves. The branches swayed together, not because they were touching, but because they were moved by the same unseen force. That image stayed with him. Maybe the universe was like that, not separate pieces pushing each other from the outside, but one deep system moving from within. Quantum entanglement had already shown that distance does not always mean separation. Two particles could behave like one system, even when far apart. That meant the universe at its deepest level might not be built from isolated parts. It might be built from relationships, connections first, objects second. He remembered something he once read about the physicist David Bohm. Bohm proposed that beneath the visible world exists a deeper order, a hidden layer, where everything is enfolded into everything else. He called it the implicate order. In that view, what we see as separate objects are like waves rising from the same ocean. They look separate on the surface, but underneath, they are one movement. The young researcher felt a quiet sense of awe. If this were true, then reality is not a collection of things. It is a single unfolding process. And consciousness might not be outside that process, looking in. It might be part of the unfolding itself. He looked around the park again. Children were playing. Birds crossed the sky. A dog barked in the distance. All separate events. Or so it seemed. But at the quantum level, every atom in that park had once been part of stars. Every particle had interacted with countless others across time. The air he breathed had been inside other lungs. The atoms in his body were ancient beyond imagination. Nothing was truly isolated. Even his thoughts, he began to wonder, might not be fully separate from the world around him. After all, the brain is physical. It is made of particles. And those particles follow the same strange quantum rules. If particles can become entangled, if observation plays a role in shaping outcomes, then maybe awareness is not just a passive witness, maybe it is a participant in a vast network of interaction. He felt both wonder and responsibility. Because if reality is deeply connected, then every action matters. Every thought may ripple outward in ways too subtle to measure, not in a magical way, not in a simple cause and effect way, but in a way that reflects deep unity. He stood up and began walking home as the sun slowly set. The sky turned orange and purple. The city lights began to glow again. Everything looked normal, but beneath the surface, he sensed something profound. The world was not a cold machine made of separate parts. It was more like a living web, a hidden network of relationships, and he was not outside that web. He was woven into it. The idea no longer felt abstract, it felt personal. If reality, at its deepest level, is connected, if observation plays a role in shaping outcomes, If consciousness is not separate from the fabric of the universe, then awareness is not neutral. It matters. He sat alone in his apartment again, the same window, the same city lights glowing in the distance. But now he was not just thinking about particles and equations, he was thinking about thoughts, his own thoughts. Every day, thousands of them move through his mind. Worries, hopes, judgments, expectations. He had always assumed they were private events, locked inside his skull. But now he questioned that assumption. Science had already shown that belief can affect the body. Placebo studies revealed that when a person truly believes they are receiving treatment, the body can respond as if the treatment were real. Pain can decrease, symptoms can improve, expectation changes biology, stress can weaken the immune system, fear can increase heart rate, calm breathing can slow it down. The mind clearly influences the body. That was not philosophy. That was measurable fact. So he asked himself a deeper question. If awareness can influence the body, could focused awareness influence reality in more subtle ways? Not by breaking the laws of physics, not by magic, but by participating in the unfolding of possibility. In the quantum world, particles exist as probabilities until measured. Measurement narrows possibility into one outcome. He wondered if attention works in a similar way in daily life. When a person constantly focuses on fear, they begin to notice more reasons to be afraid. When a person focuses on opportunity, they begin to see possibilities that were always there but unnoticed. Tension shapes experience, maybe not by changing the outer world instantly, but by influencing which possibilities become real in one's life. He felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle over him. If consciousness is part of the great web of connection, then every thought is not meaningless noise. Every belief may act like a filter. Every expectation may guide perception. Reality might not be something that simply happens to a person. It might be something a person participates in shaping moment by moment. He stood up and looked at his reflection in the dark window. For years he had seen himself as a small observer inside a giant mechanical universe. Now he was not so sure. He did not believe that thoughts magically control the stars, but he could no longer believe they were powerless either. Between total control and total helplessness, there was a middle path. Participation. He realized that if awareness truly matters, then how he chooses to think matters. How he chooses to focus matters. How he chooses to see the world matters. The idea was both empowering and unsettling, because it meant he could not blame reality for everything. He was part of it. And as he turned off the lights once more, a new understanding quietly formed inside him. If the universe is a connected process, then consciousness is not just watching the story unfold. It is helping write it. That night, he stood again by the window. The city stretched before him, glowing under the dark sky. Cars moved like streams of light. Windows flickered on and off. Somewhere, people were laughing. Somewhere else, someone was crying. On the surface, it looked like millions of separate stories, separate minds, separate lives, separate realities. But he no longer saw it that way. He now understood that beneath the surface of solid objects lies a quantum world of possibility, a world where particles can be entangled across distance, a world where observation helps shape outcomes, a world where separation may not be as absolute as it appears. He placed his hand on the cool glass of the window. Inside his body, trillions of atoms vibrated. Inside those atoms, particles followed the same mysterious rules discovered in laboratories. The same rules that had confused Albert Einstein, the same rules that inspired thinkers like David Bohm to imagine a deeper order beneath visible reality. He felt small again, but this time, the feeling was not fear, it was awe. Because if the universe is deeply connected, then he is not an accident drifting through empty space. He is part of a living process, not separate from it. Within it, he understood something clearly now. He could not prove that thoughts directly control the universe. He could not claim that consciousness bends reality like magic, but he could no longer deny that awareness plays a role in experience. Attention shapes perception. Belief influences behavior. Focus directs action, and action changes the world. Maybe the connection between mind and reality is not about instant miracles. Maybe it is about participation, a constant exchange between observer and observed, a silent conversation between consciousness and cosmos. He closed his eyes for a moment and simply observed his breathing. Inhale, exhale, Each breath connected him to the air outside. The air connected him to trees. The trees connected him to sunlight. The sunlight connected him to stars. The stars were made of the same particles that made him. Nothing truly stood alone. When he opened his eyes, the city had not changed, but he had. He no longer felt like a passive witness trapped inside a fixed world. He felt like a participant in a vast, unfolding mystery. And as he watched the lights shimmer in the distance, one final question rose gently within him. A question